Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Let's talk about it. So Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is directed by Francis Lawrence, who also directed all of the other Hunger Games movies apart from the very first one. Now this is actually a prequel to the film series that came out a few years back that starred Jennifer Lawrence. Now fun fact about me guys, okay, I've actually never watched a Hunger Games movie. Isn't that crazy? I was never really into the Hunger Games franchise. I believe the first one came out in 2012, which was the same year that the final Twilight movie came out. And so I was very Twilight orientated at that point. Okay, I was in the Twilight zone. And so I didn't really pay attention to any other franchises, not even young adult franchises. And so I really never cared about the Hunger Games. But I remember them being very, very popular. I remember people reading the books on the tube. But I just kind of missed out on that phenomenon. And by the time that the final Hunger Games movies came out, the young adult genre was very much out of fashion, and I was very much into superhero films. Okay, so I had moved on. Okay, the train had left the station. But having said that, years afterwards, when the superhero genre seems to be waning, it's very interesting to see the Hunger Games come back to life, this time with this prequel that takes place several years before the events of the main Hunger Games franchise. So I was really excited going into this film, especially because it is a prequel and I don't feel like I needed to know too much in order to understand what was going on. I've seen some famous scenes, I know about the famous quotes, and I feel like that was just enough information for me to go into this film with quite a bit of confidence. And I have to say, having seen the film itself, it was an experience. It was an experience and one that had me very conflicted. But listen, we are going to discuss all of my thoughts and feelings on this latest Hunger Games movie. But before we dive into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now without further ado guys, let's get into this. So as I said, this film is a prequel to the main Hunger Games franchise that we got a few years back. This is actually centered on the 10th annual Hunger Games, right when it was starting to, you know, pick up steam. And here we have a young President Snow who, for the purposes of this video, I'm really tempted to just call Cornelius. Cornelius is already a hard name to say. Cornelius is already difficult. His actual name is like Coriolanus. Oh my god. First of all, the whole time I thought his name was Cornelius, and then people kept saying his name differently, and I was like, can no one pronounce Cornelius? Anyway, listen, it was giving me Meet the Robinsons vibes, but his name isn't Cornelius technically, but let's just call him Corey Snow, okay? But this is a part of the origin story for Corey Snow, who later on becomes President Snow. And here, Corey Snow, portrayed by Tom Blyth, is a student at this academy in the capital, which educates the elite of you know, Panem society. So a lot of the kids that go to this school are the children of very important higher ups in this society, and Corey and his sister are no different. You know, their father was also a very important man, but he kind of fell from grace and left them penniless, and so they have to make it out on their own. You know, they can't let other people know that they're in such a poor state financially, and so Corey is trying to climb his way to the top by any means necessary. And it just so happens that there's been a reaping. Yay! There's been a reaping, and that proves to be the perfect opportunity for Corey to build up some momentum and climb up of this social ladder. Now usually it seems that the school has a process of rewarding its most talented students that get the highest grades by giving them a plinth, these words are so hard to say, a plinth prize, okay, which is sponsored by a very wealthy man, something Plinth. But that Plinth prize is very sought after, especially for someone like Corey and his family who don't actually have any financial capital, just some semblance of social capital. But unfortunately, this more meritocratic path to getting the Plinth prize has been eradicated this year because as the Hunger Games are approaching, the higher ups are looking to find ways to get more people to tune in. For some reason, seeing these suffering children who are already poor and already disenfranchised fight each other to the death, okay, on the world stage is not bringing in the audience the way that the higher ups want it. Like, for some reason, something's just not clicking. And so in order to shake things up, the higher ups have decided to get the students at this prestigious academy to become mentors for the contestants of the Hunger Games. And so their task becomes to mentor the kids, not so that they can survive the Hunger Games. No, that's not important. That's immaterial. No, their task is to make sure that the children put up a good enough show to get more viewers in and more sponsorships in. And so that's what the kids from the academy, the kids from the capital, the children of these powerful people are tasked with doing in order to come out on top of their class and get that Plinth prize. And so it's just like sickening from all fronts, right? Like, it's just disgusting from all angles. That's the thing about the Hunger Games as a newbie, right? It surprises me just how like despicable these characters are. Like, oh, they're really just the scum of the like, it's such a wild premise, and it's kind of crazy how popular the films are, because in reality, like, it's taking a look at society through this vicious lens, and a lot of what we're seeing today in the real world is playing out just like in the Hunger Games. But I don't know, people seem to be able to detach that from reality somehow, because these films made a ton of money, even though it was quite an unrelenting look and reflection on society and capitalism. Maybe not a lot of people get that, but it's just like, it's brutal. It's brutal what they do to these children. And when you think of world events, you're like, some of this stuff is happening in real life, but you don't have the same attitude to it. Anyways, we move. So yes, a young Corey Snow is eager to get his hands on the Plinth prize by any means necessary. And when he is tasked with mentoring the District 12 candidate, who's called Lucy Gray, portrayed by Rachel Zegler, he finds himself with quite the handful, but at least he has an advantage because, one, she's an attractive girl. She's the most conventionally attractive girl there, so like already the audience is going to be more inclined to be on her side and feel empathy towards her because she's a pretty girl, whatever. But also, it just so happens that she sings beautifully. She has the voice of an angel, and so Corey's sitting there thinking, oh, this is a piece of cake. Oh, this is gonna be a cakewalk. Like, oh, duh, everyone's gonna fall in love with her, and duh, everyone's gonna send donations to her because she's literally like the prize candidate. Like, she's literally a starlet in the making. And so Corey does whatever he can in order to give Lucy Gray the advantage so that he can come out on top of this challenge at the academy. But in the meantime, as they start to collaborate and get to know each other a bit better, feelings start to develop. And there's even an instance where just before the Hunger Games begin, the candidates go off to the arena where they'll be fighting for their lives, and they're joined by their mentors who, in the hopes of getting some strategic advantages and tips and tricks. But just as they're in the midst of their training session, it gets bombed by rebels, and Corey ends up at the bottom of a bunch of rubble, which Lucy Gray helps him out of. She saves his life, and he is so grateful, and he starts to feel things for her, and so he wants her to live. Like, he's thinking, you know what, maybe it's not just about me getting A stars and getting the Plinth prize. Maybe I do actually want you to survive this. Maybe I care if you live or die. Like, this whole thing is just so bizarre. It's crazy. To me, it kind of reminds me of like Passengers. Oh, speaking of Jennifer Lawrence, Remember Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt's film Passengers? They're both like love stories that have such troubled foundations that it's like I want to root for it, I guess. Like I want to buy into this, but also like he's willing to let you die in the arena. Like like that's kind of crazy to me. Like obviously she saves his life and he's like, oh man, like I really want her to live after all. But the very fact that he's in this disgustingly sadistic upper class that's willing to do this to people, and he doesn't really blink an eye at first at this whole horrendous barbaric ordeal. I don't know, like there's some things that you just can't get over, like how, you know, Chris Pratt awakened Jennifer Lawrence far too soon in that spaceship that they were on. Like it's something that you can't get over. So the 10th Hunger Games begin and Lucy Gray is forced to fight against the other contestants in this arena, but she's been given a couple of advantages here and there. For instance, Corey gave her his mother's compact, which he filled with rat poison, but that unfortunately ends up killing off this sweet little girl who had tuberculosis instead of one of her main enemies in the arena, which was really, really sad to see. But we also get these other gruesome deaths. By the way, is this like 12 rated? Or is this a PG-13 for American terms, or is this like a rated R? Because the fact that this film is actually quite violent makes me rethink all of these superhero films that we've been getting over the last few years. Like, why couldn't they go further with their violence, but the Hunger Games series can? There are times where you have weapons that emerge from people's torsos completely bloodless, where it's like, oh, okay, this is likely to be a PG-13. But some of the deaths here are like brutal. Again, the Hunger Games as a concept is so brutal. I'm surprised it's so popular. But yeah, it really hit home, you know, seeing these young people, these kids running around, killing each other, you know, fighting to the death in these like horrible, violent, vicious ways. It was really brutal. And I was impressed to see that they actually went there. They actually had that punch when it came to those action sequences. Now, the good news is at the end of the games, Lucy Gray ends up winning. Yes, she emerges victorious in the 10th Hunger Games. She's destroyed all of her enemies, or they've destroyed themselves. And she's even able to emerge from a pile of rainbow snakes. Rainbow snakes, okay? Completely alive and unharmed because of her angelic singing voice, and also because the snakes were exposed to her scent earlier on because of a napkin that Corey left in their cage, which somehow they were all able to smell, even though it was only at the edge of the cage. Whatever. We won't over-examine everything. That didn't make sense, but fine. Or maybe it was a combination of the two, you know, hence the title of this film. Either way, Lucy Gray ends up winning. But unfortunately, the bad news is that Casca Highbottom, portrayed by Peter Dinklage, has a particular vendetta against Corey Snow because of his previous friendship with his father, and he's been keeping a close eye on Corey. He didn't want Corey to win. He didn't want Corey to win. No matter what happened, he was like, you're not getting the Plinth Prize. I don't care if your candidate wins, like, you're not getting that prize. You're not getting your hands on that money. No, I won't allow it. I want to... like, over my dead body, he said, okay, my cold dead hands, you'll grab that prize. Now, that ends up being a rather unfortunate analogy. But, you know, he is able to suss out that Corey has been lying, cheating the whole time. And one of the main rules for this whole assignment is that they cannot cheat and, you know, help their contestants to win the Hunger Games themselves. And that's just such a bizarre rule, because considering how sadistic everything else is, to have that hint of like fairness, the illusion of fairness and justice by saying that the students can't cheat to help their candidates win is just so absurd and so pointless. Like, you're already doing a fight to the death amongst children who weren't even there, as it's mentioned in the film. They weren't even there or even old enough to remember the Great War, and so they're being punished for nothing, for literally existing and being born in the wrong district. Well, again, similarities to life and whatnot. We all know the metaphors of this series, but the idea that they would be okay with having these televised death matches amongst children every single year, but not okay with the rich kids helping their candidates out by cheating just a little bit, is just laughable and so hypocritical. But as a result of being caught cheating, Corey ends up getting shipped off to District 12, where he will serve as a peacekeeper. Well, initially he was supposed to go to District 8, but he ends up paying someone off to allow him to go to District 12, so he can at least search for Lucy Gray, who he does find, you know, singing at a bar, in this like country style bar, and they end up resuming their little love affair, and it's all cute, fine and dandy, until disaster strikes, because Corey's friend, Sir Janus Plinth, yes, that very same Plinth, it turns out he is a part of this like rebel group uprising that's bubbling underneath the surface, and Corey catches onto this, and ever eager to climb up the social ladder and rankings, ends up selling out his friend. Yeah, betrayal. He sells out his friend to Dr. Ghoul, portrayed by Viola Davis, who is aptly named considering she is a warmonger. But he sells out his friend, which leads to him getting hung, and then he has to run away, and he plans to run away with Lucy Gray, but things fall apart and she tries to kill him with a snake or something, and then he gets really angry. He's like, no, you tried to kill me with a snake, and then he starts to like hate everyone and all women. And then he goes back to the capital because he's gotten in good with Dr. Ghoul, and then he ends up wearing red, just like President Snake. And then he ends up killing Mr. Highbottom or Dr. Highbottom, and then he like walks into the distance with snow falling around his shoulders, and he has become the villain of the Hunger Games franchise. The end. How did I do? I think that was a pretty good summary. Okay, so I don't know if you could ascertain from my summarization of this film, but there were definitely parts where I was more invested, and then there were parts that just that literally like this film, I don't think there's been a more confusing film this year than Hunger Games. Like this film was wild. Okay, let me tell you the parts that I really enjoyed. Okay, first of all, the Hunger Games themselves. As I keep saying, I was genuinely shocked to see how brutal they were, how real and visceral they were. Like they went there. And as someone who's never watched any of these Hunger Games films, I was like, oh, damn, okay. This is how you guys get down here. Okay, like, I definitely want to check out the rest. I love the fact that obviously you have this allegory metaphor for capitalism, social class issues, you know, all sorts of socio-political commentary being sprinkled throughout here, through Suzanne Collins's work, both in the books and obviously been adapted in these films. So that's always going to excite me, because you guys know I love my media with a little bit of social commentary, but I didn't realize just how like poignant and powerful and brutal it really is. So like I'm definitely gonna check out the rest of these films, because this sounds like it's right up my alley. And I also found the juxtaposition between the horrific acts of violence that these children are forced to partake in versus the aloof, quaint, happy-go-lucky attitude of Lucretius, the first formal host of the Hunger Games. I thought that contrast was just so poignant and just so well done, like very effective, to really drive home how unempathetic, sadistic the society in the capital really is. It's so crazy and so bizarre to see how mentoring these children who are forced to fight for their lives is a homework assignment, some coursework for them to do to get the top grades and potentially the scholarship. And it's just absurd. But again, it's just demonstrating and emphasizing that disconnect between, you know, those in the capital, the upper echelon of society, versus everyone else in all the other districts that are made to suffer. Another element of this film that I enjoyed to some extent was the love story. I think the two characters had really great chemistry together, and I bought into it. You know, once I just accepted the fact that Corey Snow was kind of a dickhead. Once I accepted the fact that he was necessarily a dickhead because he came from the capital, he didn't really understand humanity. Like, he had no humanity in him. Like, he had no empathy. No one from that social class has empathy. So like once I kind of put that to the side for just a little bit, I could start to buy into their love story, kind of, sort of, maybe. It was mostly because of the two actors' chemistry, to be honest, because on paper this is shambolic, on paper this is a interview with a vampire situation, but when you have two actors just like that series that come together and that have that really great chemistry, although not as great as Interview with a Vampire, don't get it twisted, but you know, they have really good chemistry together. So I was like, you know what, okay, fine, let me set aside my questions and quarrels with this situation and just buy into the love story for a second, especially when he got that buzz cut and he was a peacekeeper over in District 12. I was like, okay, like, I'm seeing the vision. I'm seeing the vision. And speaking of the actors having great chemistry, I also enjoyed their performances in general in this film, particularly Tom Blyth. Tom Blyth was acting like his life depended on it. Tom Blyth was acting like the rent was due. Like the rent was due, he got an eviction notice, he got a final warning, and he went out there and just gave it his all. And really and truly, even though a lot of the spotlight has been on Rachel Zegler for this film, he is the star of the show. It really is a Cornelius, his name is not Cornelius, whatever, a Cornelius Snow villain origin story. That's essentially what this is, and that is the most compelling part of this film, is discovering how President Snow became President Snow and seeing his descent into evil. Now, whether it's a convincing descent is what we will discuss in a moment. But for the most part, I was really invested in this story, and it was particularly because of Tom Blyth's amazing performance. And even though Rachel Zegler is not the main character that I thought she was in this film, she's still really brilliant here as well, particularly with the singing sequences. I think that's kind of why she was such a perfect actress for this role, because she is a talented singer, and so she was able to perform all of those songs really well. She has a kind of like sad, tragic lilt to her voice that fits the character brilliantly. And like I said, one of the plot points is that the students have to make their candidates marketable, and to Lucy Gray's credit, she was an easy package for Corey to market, because she was this cute young girl, you know, wearing this traditional dress that belonged to her mother and singing these sad southern songs. And so yeah, it was like taking candy from a baby, and she got a ton of donations for her efforts. But aside from her gorgeous singing, I also really liked the attitude that the character had. You know, like she had a spunk to her. A lot of female characters do these days to make up for years of misrepresentation of female characters, I guess. But they did make an effort to add other dimensions to the character. For instance, there are moments where she does show fear. There is a scene where she tells Corey, like, oh, when it's the nighttime, that's when the fear starts to pick up. That's when I really start to get afraid. I've butchered the quote. Okay, that's not what is said in the film, but that is the essence of what she means. And I thought that was really touching and endearing and real, because yeah, in the broad daylight, she's able to put on a brave face and, you know, show herself to be strong and powerful, like she can go through this. But at the end of the day, this is a traumatic experience. This is an insane, sadistic, traumatic experience. So, you know, when nightfall comes, the fear starts to pick up, and, you know, she's no longer as brave as she is in the daylight. But on top of the fear of being a victim in the Hunger Games, you also have that added element of being afraid to lose your humanity because of the things that you could do. One of the philosophical themes or ideas that are presented in the film is the idea that, you know, civilization is all well and good when it's peacetime, but as soon as humanity is put into a position where you have to survive, kill or be killed, then all of that civility that is taught to us, that we become accustomed to, gets stripped away immediately, and we fall into our base instincts. But it's also something that Lucy fears within herself, as she is tasked with getting rid of, you know, some of the competition in order to survive this thing. And so when she does end up killing that little girl who had tuberculosis by accident with a poisoned water bottle, she's really crushed and she feels like a murderer, because she's been relegated to doing these crazy things because of this sadistic practice. Sticking to the performances, the entire cast here is really, really strong, especially Peter Dinklage. We also have Hunter Schafer portraying Tigress, who is Corey's sister. Jason Schwartzman, who's the first official host of the Hunger Games on the 10th one, is brilliant, and he is a great predecessor to Stanley Tucci's presenter character. So it just makes sense that the hosting position would evolve into what Stanley Tucci becomes in the main Hunger Games films. We also had Josh Andres Rivera, who portrays Sejanus, who is the conflicted rich kid, the son of Blyth, the guy that gives out the scholarships that Snow so desperately wants. Yeah, that guy. But yeah, he is a very privileged kid who has underprivileged background, and so he is sympathetic to the cause, the rebellion cause, and he is just like full of inner conflicts. Like, he just has so much guilt over what's going on with the Hunger Games, but also the injustices in society overall, as does Peter Dinklage's character as well. But there are some people who are just like, this is insane, this is crazy. Like, what are we doing as a society? Like, this isn't right. But obviously and predictably, those people who are sympathetic towards anything are quickly stomped out of the equation. And in the case of Sejanus, he ends up getting hanged for his involvement in this rebellion. And another standout in the cast is, of course, none other than Auntie Viola Davis. Now, I will say, if I did have a few critiques of this character, I really appreciated the character. I think she was really fascinating, super evil. Like, when it comes to the spectrum of evil that we have on display in the Capitol, she's like, oh, she's too far gone, okay? Like, she is on the far side. And it was really fascinating to see her conversations with Corey, the fact that she helped kind of infect his mind with said evil and got him thinking in that certain way to sway him towards the dark side. So she was very much the Emperor Palpatine to Luke's Anakin Skywalker. But if I did have a couple of critiques of the character, as great as Viola Davis always is in anything, I feel like there was a bit of chewing. There was a little bit of chewing the scenery, okay, when it came to her performance. I felt like this character was just a lot more out of this world than the other characters were. Like, all of the Hunger Games characters are a bit quirky, a bit weird, like a bit evil, you know, but I feel like Viola Davis's character in particular was just like kind of evil. So that took me out of it just a little bit. And also, and this was more of an aesthetic choice that I had an issue with, that kind of complemented the creative choice that she made with her performance. But the one blue eye situation, yeah, they give her one blue eye to kind of, again, convey that sense of, oh, she's crazy and she's evil and she's a mad scientist. And they also kind of do something to her skin to make her look older and more crinkly and crepey and evil. You know, just age is evil, so, you know, the older she looks, the more evil she is. But the one blue eye situation is what I took umbrage with, because they love to do this to black people. Hollywood loves to change and transform black people into something else. We've seen this with animated films where we literally get changed into like animals or creatures or whatever. So, you know, we know the Soul and the Princess and the Frog situation, but we also see it in live action where we're often painted a different colour, a la Zoe Saldana in Avatar and Guardians. And here, this is just like a small little thing, like one blue eye, just yeah. But in the wider context, it's like, oh, I've seen this before. Like, because no one else has like strangely coloured eyes, and everyone else pretty much just looks like normal. Like, they're wearing cool costumes, which I'll talk about in a second, but they don't have like a wacky biological feature that transforms them in the way that Viola Davis's blue eye and crazy hair does. But otherwise, the look was stunning. The look, if they had just kept the two brown eyes that she has, it would have been mwah, incredible, because the whole aesthetic was genius. The fact that the lab coat slash dress that she has on kind of bleeds from red to white is brilliant imagery. And that brings me to another positive of this film. The costumes were to die for. Yeah, The costumes were to die for. Now, listen, I know, even though I've never seen these films before, I know that the Hunger Games franchise is famous for their phenomenal costume designs. I mean, a lot of, for instance, Effie's costumes from the original films were like Alexander McQueen. So like this franchise knows its way around the fashion realm. And I think this prequel is no exception to that, especially, of course, for the people in the Capitol. I mean, there's nothing that's super outrageous. I feel like the original films had more, you know, crazy, wacky, outrageous costumes. And I think that's intentional. I think that's their way of using the costumes as a storytelling device to show you how the fashions progressed and got more extravagant as time went on and the socio-economic disparities increased within Panem. So that's all very clever visual storytelling, but none of the outfits in this film are like as super wacky as, you know, what Effie was wearing in the original films, but still it's enough to tell you who belongs where. More than enough to tell you exactly where these people belong. And finally, when it came to the positives of this film, I really love the fact that it felt like a film. Oh, shade, but no shade. Yes, this was cinematic. This felt cinematic. And I mentioned in my review of The Marvels last week that whilst I enjoyed elements of that film, one major critique that I had was that it just did not feel cinematic. It was giving Disney Channel. It was giving streaming movie. It was giving Blue Beetle, unfortunately. Like, where's the cinema? Where's the cinematography? You know, where's the production value? Like, it just wasn't there. But here, oh yeah, Francis Lawrence knows. He knows. He knows how to make cinema. Okay, he knows how to make cinematic blockbusters. He's well practiced, especially within this franchise, and this is no exception. So all in all, I had a great time with my very first Hunger Games movie. Oh my god, I was ready to leave the cinema with a massive smile on my face and just like, I can't wait to watch the rest of these films. I can't believe I never checked them out. I was so excited until we got to the third act, where I don't know what. Now here's the thing, before I saw the film in the cinema, I did see chatter on Twitter. I'm still stuck on that site, okay? I did see chatter on Twitter that the reviews for the film were really negative. I believe the Rotten Tomatoes score was hovering around 50% a few days back, and a lot of people were surprised because they saw the film themselves and really loved it. And so there's this huge divide between audiences and critics, which is happening more and more frequently these days, I must say. I have definitely noticed that. But yeah, there was a huge divide where it's like, did these critics even watch the same film that the audiences did? Because the audiences seem to love this film. And to be fair, 2/3 into this movie, I also thought the same. I was like, oh, these critics are bugging. What are they talking about? This film is cinema. This film is amazing. But then it got to the third act where Lucy and Cornelius, that's not his name, break up, and I was like, I was like, no. Like, oh, that was so butchered. It was wild. What do you mean that's what made him evil? No. No. They really butchered that part. They really butchered, like, there was such a good descent to madness and evil happening throughout this film. But then when it hit the third act, something about these third acts is not clicking. I said this in the Marvels review as well. Everyone is struggling with these third acts. But this is one of the most atrocious examples because they were doing so well. Like, Francis Lawrence had done so well with the first 2/3. It was literally cinema. And then the third act hits and they're in that forest, they're in the woods running away, and they just break up. Like, for what happened there? Maybe you guys can tell me. Maybe you guys can explain to me what happened, because I feel like I blinked and all of a sudden their relationship crumbled. Like, I don't understand. Why did Lucy run away? Was it because the gun was in the cabin? But like, she seemed to know that the gun was in the cabin. She didn't seem surprised. What happened there? Am I missing a piece of context? At one point in the woods, he lets it slip out that he's killed 3 people. And now they have this pact. They have this thing about trust where it's like, if I don't trust you, it's not going to work out, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine, that's cute, whatever. But she suspects that he might be lying about, you know, killing 3 people. He says that the third person is himself, kind of metaphorically. But in reality, there was an actual third person that he killed, his best friend, who he sold out, okay, to a warmongerer. So she suspects that he's lying and then turns on him, using his mother's scarf against him to pop a snake in there, because we have to keep referencing back to the title. That was a bit cheesy throughout the film, but whatever. She pops a snake in there and then he grabs it and like it bites him and he almost dies of the poison. The quality of dialogue literally just falls off of a cliff during the scene, and he's just randomly asking like, are you trying to kill me? Are you trying to kill me? Like just shouting in the forest on his own. And then you just hear Lucy start to sing amongst the creatures of the forest. Like, she starts to sing like Snow White, like Snow. Oh, maybe this was Rachel Zegler preparing for Snow White. Oh, I see now. Oh, it's starting to make sense. She was preparing for her role in Snow White. It had nothing to do with. It had nothing to do with Hunger Games, but they kept rolling anyway because she sounded so good. Okay, I see. I see what was going on. But on a serious note, that whole sequence just blew my mind. Like it just felt like such a drop in quality in terms of the writing, in terms of the script, even in terms of the acting. Like Tom Blyth was doing such a great job, but that moment was just not good. Like it was just bizarre, and it leads me to believe that it must have been some kind of studio interference. Maybe they had to wrap things up much more quickly than Francis Lawrence anticipated. They just had to shorten that descent into evil that Snow was supposed to go through. And so unfortunately his whole like motive and villain origin story ended up being the fact that he broke up with Lucy Gray. And she tried to poison him with a snake using his mother's scarf as a distraction. Like that's why he became President Snow? That kind of ruined everything for me. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that it was just this scene that caused the 180 in the characters' motives and behavior, but I'm saying that that particular scene, kind of trying to wrap things up really quickly and bring him to the end place that we needed him to be at in order for him to, you know, feasibly become President Snow, was just really poorly handled. Like that scene was the worst scene in the whole film, and it was actually the most pivotal. So like, what now? And so with all of that being said, guys, I'm going to be giving Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, a 7.5 out of 10. It could have been an 8. It could have even been an 8.5 had it not been for that final act. That final act just ruined everything. But that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.